want to bring in Andy McCarthy now, former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Fox News contributor, author of the book Ball of Collusion. Andrew, hello to you and good morning. I want to frame this segment in the following way. We'll take Democrats first and then Republicans. For Democrats to make the hearings a success this week, what do they need to do, Andy?
Bill, I think what they need to do is try to keep the focus tightly on the president's behavior and specifically those of his emissaries in Ukraine, and try to make all of it about whether there was this alternative pipeline of U.S. policy that was aimed not toward the betterment of U.S.-Ukraine relations in the national interest, but in trying to improve President Trump's fortunes in terms of the 2020 campaign.
Okay, all right, so we'll watch that. What do Republicans need to do to make it a success, do you think?
Well, they have a tough row to hoe because it's really a proceeding that's run by the Democrats, and they don't have much in the way of rights to block that. So they should try to use that to their advantage. They want to show people that Adam Schiff, who is front and center here, is not really an honest broker. He's a partisan, so they want to make him as much of the focus as they can. And most importantly, Bill, they want to show that they have an alternative version of events, or at least a context in which to understand the activities of President Trump's that the Democrats want to focus on. They want to put these in context. They want to show there was corruption for the president to be worried about. They want to show that there was a Ukraine angle in terms of the Trump-Russia investigation, the 2016 election. So they want to argue that all that stuff needs to come in, and they want to force Schiff to suppress their effort to raise it, so that highlights their point of view that this is not a fair proceeding.
Well, if each side does their job, then I imagine by the end of the week we're going to run ourselves in a circle. Let's see if that's the case, whether or not. You wrote a piece, National Review. I want to put it on the screen here. The whistleblower and the president's right to present a defense. If Trump is impeached, he can build a strong case against conviction, but he might be wiser not to. Lindsey Graham, on the whistleblower from over the weekend, said the following, Andy. Listen here.
They don't call the whistleblower in the House. This thing is dead on arrival in the Senate. The only way you can fairly deal with this issue is for us to find out who the whistleblower is. No American can be accused of a crime based on an anonymous allegation. The whistleblower is foundational to what they're doing into the House, and the fact that they don't want to call him tells you everything they know, everything you need to know about how valid this effort is to impeach the president.
Okay, so you know the whistleblower's name was on the request list that came out on Saturday. What does that tell you, Andy?
Well, obviously, they want to go there, Bill, and one of the reasons they want to go there is I think part of the president's defense is that there has been a coordinated effort between leading Democrats and their operatives inside the intelligence community since the president darkened the doorstep of the Oval Office 3 years ago to shorten his presidency, oust him if possible, and certainly hamstring him in pursuing his agenda. They want to show that this whistleblower is part of that coordinated effort, and I think that's a key part of the president's defense. So to the extent that Senator Graham is saying that the president is entitled to his defense in the impeachment proceedings, I think he's right about that.
Well, the cross-examination will be critical, as you point out there. It's a political process. We know that in the House. Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat, tweeted out this: House Republican cover-up caucus wants sham witnesses to testify. My 2 cents, get lost, all in caps. Garrett Tenney mentioned the possibility of surprises. I don't know if you anticipate some. Maybe tomorrow, when the president suggests he might release the first transcript of the first phone call with the Ukrainian president from April. Smart idea or not, Andy?
Yeah. I don't know. I think, you know, Bill, part of the Democrats' theory here is that the president promised the Ukrainian president a meeting at the White House, which is what came up in that initial conversation. And that is part of what the Democrats allege is the quid pro quo, that the president refused to grant that meeting until the Ukrainians agreed to conduct these investigations. So I don't know how much that would help, but you know, we'll see how it goes.
Throw it all in the bucket and we'll see what we get, right, in 5 days. Thank you, Andy McCarthy, our leadoff guest for this week.